This is Joshua Hart here for Seconds Out. Delighted to be joined by Gareth A Davies here on this lovely, lovely Tuesday evening. Gareth, how is everything, mate? You all good?
Good, very good. Is it Josh or Joshua?
My actual name's Joshua, but I'll just go with
So,
Josh.
so, and with that haircut that I can see today, are you an Amish or not?
No, I'm just trying to grow my hair back out at the moment, so I'm in that awkward stage of growing it.
I just wondered if it was kind of you a mid American kind of evangelist. That was all.
No, I can
You've had a
confirm.
vicious. It's a vicious cut.
Well, thankfully the people cannot see me on this camera anyway. Um, Gareth, let's dive straight into things.
It's a lovely cut, but it's
Oh,
vicious.
thank you very much, Gareth. Thank you very much. But yeah, diving straight into things. Obviously we are expecting the official announcement this week for Conor Benn versus Chris Eubank Jr. I know we've already spoke about it last week, but I've had a few more questions to bring to you. So one of the things that I've been thinking of is obviously you were around in that era of the fathers fighting as well. How does this rivalry between the sons compare to the fathers rivalry?
Very similar in lots of ways, really. Because I think there's a genuine dislike for each other. They wind each other up in a certain way. There's a lot of huffing and oh, did he really just say that? All of that kind of. Um, I think in this era, I think Nigel Benn was the more beloved. I think Chris Eubank Senior was always hated till he was loved, if I can say it. I think people really love him now, but he really was a figure of. Did he really just say that? Was he really just like that? Is it all this put on? And in fact, when you know him now compared to what he was like then, neither of them have really changed. Nigel's a very impassioned character, and Chris Eubank Sr. is very, very quirky. So they were kind of always themselves, if you like. And I think the boys do mirror the fathers in so many ways that Conor's so emotional. He's always picking fights with everyone. The other day at the Ring Magazine Awards, he was literally picking fights with everyone, apart from Shakur Stevenson, who said he was absolutely brilliant to meet and that they got on incredibly well. I wonder why he said he wasn't kind of having a go at me, trying to indicate that Conor loves and respects him so much that he wouldn't have a go at him. I will say that though, Shakur Stevenson's very cool. Yeah, it's a very good point how similar they are. They're like peas in a pod with their fathers. Um, I think the rivalry we didn't have their rivalry was on TV way back then, 30 years ago. It wasn't like social media today where it was viral and everyone was watching clips over and over again. There were just flashpoints, and I think we knew we were in for something special. I don't know if you've seen the documentary, The Four Kings, about these two, but also about Lennox Lewis and Frank Bruno. And obviously, that those fights were 2 weeks apart, 30 years ago. I don't think we knew how special that was at the time, but looking back on it, it was. Yeah, I think the bloodlust. I think the bloodlust because of the positive dopamine clomiphene tests. Um, I think the extension of the fight by almost 2.5 years since it was first signed, just given time for it all to marinate. Um, Conor Benn going over to Riyadh and getting in Chris Eubank Jr.'s face on the day of his weigh-in, of ambushing him in the ring, of just being out there and being willing to make it massive enmity between them. I think they're very similar, the two fights. What they aren't, what they weren't then, is this far apart in size and weight, though. That's the big difference.
Mm. One thing you mentioned is obviously how similar it is with the rivalry and I guess you say the hatred between the two. Where do you think the hatred started between Chris Eubank Jr. and Conor Benn? Do you think that was before the drug test when the fight was first signed?
If you go back to that first week in October 2022, Chris Eubank Jr. seemingly and apparently, according to Eddie Hearn and the promoters, the Sauerland brothers, had been kind of putting the picture behind the scenes and was prepared to still go ahead and have the fight. That was our understanding. I think since the non-disclosure and subjudice of so many things under legalese during the 2 years that ensued, I think his dislike for Conor Benn grew. I think the more he thought about it, the more he felt that certainly while he felt that Conor Benn was guilty, while he felt Conor Benn was guilty of whatever he felt he was guilty of him believing that Conor Benn had cheated. I think the desire in him grew to want to beat Conor Benn up afterwards. I think there is a genuine desire in Chris Eubank Jr. in his body and in his soul to put Conor Benn in his place, to put this jumped up kid in inverted commas in his place. Called him a rat, called the promoters what he called them. Remember, he called them all out at the press conference for the Better Be a Bivol one, I think it was, that he was on against Zeramata. I think a dislike of each other has grown and grown. I think they haven't mentioned their fathers that much. They've mentioned each other. I think Chris Eubank's got a lot to lose if he is defeated by Conor Benn. But the problem for him is in the interim, he's been knocked out badly, crumpled into a suitcase like clothes in that first fight with Liam Smith. Brilliant that he was in the second fight. It's a win-lose for him because he's expected to win because of his superior size, superior level of fighting that he's had in his career. People are overlooking the fact that he's 35, he's been knocked out in the interim, and that there's this weight rehydration clause which precludes him from going above 170 pounds. Quite a lot is stacked against him in this fight against Conor Benn.
Another thing that you said last week was obviously seeing how quickly Turkey was able to put this fight together kind of exposes how poor both sides were within the negotiation processes. So do you still believe we need traditional promoters, or Turkey can kind of just get any fight he wants?
Well, for as long as he's there with the copious amounts of money that he can put up to make fights and detail them in the way that he can, I don't think we are going to have concerns about big fights being made. I mentioned this to someone the other day, the only two people I can think of who aren't really within the fold, if you like, within the family that Turkey's created are Al Heyman and Gervonta Davis. Outside those two, pretty much everyone else is either listening or sitting at a table and cooperating with Turki Alalshikh. And I think right now, boxing goes in episodes and in eras. And right now, we don't need to worry about the biggest fights not being made because they will be made. That goes all the way to fights like Anthony Joshua and Deontay Wilder, where if Turki Alalshikh wasn't around, I don't think Eddie Hearn would be mentioning it, which he has in the last couple of weeks, or certainly since Tyson Fury said he was retired. I'm doing a lot of inverted commas today, but because I think when it's a bit like I've been talking about Nick Ball and Noya Nui as a fantasy fight for over, well, maybe about 7 or 8 months. And all of these fights come across the radar of Turki Alalshikh. And as they come across the radar, and as he realizes they are viable for the fans and viable as matchups, he projects them out there. And I think My concern was if, and we may return to a time when it's like this, we may never. Turkey could be in boxing forever. He could be around for 20 more years in boxing, till we're all brown bread or till some of us are brown bread, 25, 30 years. He could be in it for life, especially now that he's got the Ring magazine and the Ring magazine belts where he can make fights of his own. So really, in answer to your question, I think we found one of the most influential figures of all time. And in 16 months in the sport, he's already made so many differences and changes that boxing should have learnt from it. And that was my point about it, really. Don't waste the fights. Don't waste the fights based on ego. Get them done. Because Benn against Eubank is bigger now than it was. 3 times the number of people at the O2 Arena will be in the stadium, whichever stadium it is. I believe it's Spurs. Um, don't don't let greed and ego supersede what should be great matchups. That fight should have been made before Turkey needed to intervene, but at least Turkey did intervene.
Would you be as excited for Conor Benn versus Chris Eubank Jr. if you hadn't have lived through the father's era as well?
No, it's a bloodline fight. It's as simple as that. If the fathers hadn't met, if there hadn't been such a thrill and excitement from the two of them, if the fathers hadn't been in the same era as Michael Watson, remember, who arguably beat both. Well, he beat Benn. For me, he beat Eubank as well in the first fight, and was beating him in the second one when, of course, he catastrophically suffered horrific brain hemorrhages. And he's 60 in March, and he's having a big celebration, and I look forward to going to his birthday. In what was a great era, if you include Steve Collins in that era as well. It was an incredible era. No, they wouldn't even be fighting each other had there not been that bloodline lineage enmity, if you like, bad blood between the fathers. We wouldn't even be seeing this. They wouldn't be marked on the same page. So we are definitely seeing, it's not for belts, it's for the championship of each other's name. That's what this is all about. I don't think they would have been, I will put it this way. Once Conor Benn has fought Chris Eubank, if he beats Chris Eubank, he's not going to stay at middleweight and have fights at middleweight. He ain't going to be challenging Hamza Shiraz next. If Hamza Shiraz beats Carlos Adames in what is a difficult fight for Shiraz. But you're just not going to see it. Conor Benn will go back, maybe even back down to welterweight if the fights are there for him.
Moving away from this, you mentioned AJ versus Wilder and how Eddie Hearn has been speaking about it again in the aftermath of Tyson Fury announcing his retirement. How much interest do you have in a fight at this stage between Anthony Joshua and Deontay Wilder?
Well, I think the reason it's come up, if Tyson Fury, it might still have been mentioned, but if Tyson Fury and Anthony Joshua was being discussed right now and was moving ahead for June, July, August, I don't think Eddie Hearn and Anthony Joshua will be looking for fights for himself, because that is the biggest fight out there for him right now. It's the biggest fight out there for Tyson Fury. It's arguably worth 200 million quid or $200 million. It's arguably worth minimum 50 million each to step into the ring. And obviously that's the business end of it, but it also completes the era and completes the legacy for both men, in terms of two British behemoths in boxing over a decade together with a very similar trajectory. I think given now that Tyson Fury is retired, Anthony Joshua perhaps needs to map out a journey that projects towards a rematch with Daniel Dubois, if Daniel Dubois beats Parker, if Dubois beats Usyk, if Dubois wants to fight him next before Usyk. So Dillian White, Deontay Wilder. I know Bakoley's. We've heard Turki Alalshikh say Martin Okolie for Anthony Joshua. I don't think that's the next fight for him, in my view. But obviously, they're looking at the resonance of the Rumble in the Jungle and Congo and that on 50 years on. And there's no big fights in Africa. So it's how the landscape is built at the moment is quite interesting. And I think as a result of that, and as a result of 9 days ago, Tyson Fury, 8 days ago, Tyson Fury saying he's retiring, and he is for now. We take him on the face value. I think Wilder comes into focus. Um, I think there is enough interest. There's enough interest in Anthony Joshua's mind. I've certainly been with him where he's mentioned Deontay Wilder before. I've sat down with him during interviews, and he's mentioned still wanting to have the fight with Deontay Wilder. And why wouldn't he? Wilder looks slightly like a shell of himself after the defeats to Zhilei Zhang and then previously to Joseph Parker. And it's a fight that Joshua would relish right now. It's not a fight that would sell out a big football stadium, but it's certainly a fight that you'd find it hard to get a ticket for the O2 Arena for. You know,
How do Anthony Joshua's
do you
chances?
do you, do you think do you have any appetite to see it?
In a sense, yes, but I want to wait until we see Wilder back in the ring first. I know, obviously, he has a fight. I don't know if it's been announced yet, but I know there's a fight in place against Curtis Harper that they're looking at
Yeah,
March. So I want to see how Wilder looks there first of all, and then we can kind of, while it's not an opponent anywhere near into the Joshua's level, we can get a grasp to see what he's actually got left. So I think wait and see how Wilder looks in this, as you can say, just run over fight, and then we can kind of make a bit more of a judgment on how he looks.
he looked dangerously like something was that aura of his was missing against Parker, and for me against Zhang, he looked like he couldn't pull the trigger at all, and it was a sign of age and that he may be washed up. I don't want to sell him down the river in that way, but he may be washed up.
Well, moving away from Wilder, but staying on AJ, how do Anthony Joshua's chances of becoming a three-time world champion look in your eyes?
Quite distant from this point, but Daniel Dubois looks a difficult man to beat at the moment. But in many ways, if that's the fight he's going to find himself in with Dubois, and Dubois's got a belt still, that's how he's going to do it. But that's potentially 3 fights away, especially if Fury sits out because he wants that fight. I'm sure he wants that fight very badly. He's going to have to go well into 2026 to do it, in my view. I don't think we're going to see him fighting. I know he fought 3 times in the 12 months period at one point recently, but it's a big ask for him. You know, I mean, this year could be the end. I don't know if I mentioned it to you the other day, but I was kind of going through if it could be the end. We could say Valete to Tyson Fury, Anthony Joshua, Alexander Usyk, Dillian White, Deontay Wilder, Derek Chisora. We could say goodbye to all of them in 2025. They all have a couple of fights. We might not, because there's a lot of money swirling around in the heavyweight division right now. So we might see them go into 2026. But that group I mentioned, and maybe you can throw Zhilei Zhang in there, I don't see them being in boxing by the end of 2026. And Joshua's going to have to hang around for a little bit to be a 3-time heavyweight champion of the world. I'm not sure he does it. I'm not sure he gets a world title fight, a world championship again. In my view, I'm very nervous about him stepping in with Daniel Dubois again. It's going to be a shootout. If he lands first, he could do it. There's no question because he can finish anyone. But whether he can finish Daniel Dubois is another matter altogether.
You mentioned all those names that we could be saying goodbye to at, I guess, you say the very latest at the end of 2026. Do you think if some of these names are to stick around, we're going to have to get to a stage where we're going to have to see them face those young up and coming fighters like your Fabio Wardleys and your Moses Talmers?
Yeah, yeah. Well, Daniel Dubois is in that mix as well, isn't he, of the young fighters? as is Ajit Kabayel, I suppose, as well, and maybe even Justice Hooney. They're coming through. Joseph Parker fits into the middle group with Kabayel. They may have to, but I think this is, in a way, what we've seen with Tyson Fury, that he stayed around so long in kinds of physical terms, that there's a slightly different version of him fighting Alexander Usyk in 2024, where he's not quite the same fighter he was when he fought Deontay Wilder. And we're going to see that more and more with his older fighters. We'll see it with Anthony Joshua. We'll see it with Usyk at some point. Father Time will catch up with him. Father Time waits for no one. Father Time could end up being the true enemy of Alexander Usyk. 38 just, isn't he? A couple of days ago, rather, in January. So God forbid that they're still around and having to face Moses Atauma in a year's time, because that could be an altogether different division if Moses Atauma takes over. I certainly think Moses Atauma and Daniel Dubois isn't that far away. It's probably not further away than 18 months. Wow.
So
That's going to be some fight.
you think we'll see Daniel Dubois versus Moses Atauma within the next 18 months?
By the end of 2026, I think we will, yeah.
Wow. Well, just moving away from that, and I guess we've
It's
got
a thrilling thought, though, isn't it?
oh, absolutely. I've not really heard anyone come out with that yet, and that's why I had to just like double check, say, really? 'Cause it is a great fight, isn't it? Dubois versus Moses Atauma is a fight, and especially when they grow their profiles more, that's a headliner and anywhere in this country.
Itauma versus Bacoli, Itauma versus Wardley, Wardley versus Dubois, Dubois versus Bacoli. Hopefully, we get to see all of these, you know?
Well, it's fair to say we're coming into a very interesting time in the heavyweight division. Just
Very.
moving away from this, we saw the return of Misfits at the weekend as they kicked off their 2025. And I'd say the biggest talking point coming away from it was the announcement of KSI's next fight and a whirlwind 48 hours of announcing him versus Wayne Bridger by Monday afternoon, the fight now being off. What did you make of, I guess you say, the fight first of all in KSI fighting Wayne Bridge?
Well, obviously, Wayne Bridges removed himself. I saw the statement.
Hmm.
Um, he was rightly very hurt by what I thought were very distasteful, even disgusting level comments in the ring. There was no need for it. It's below the belt. It was plainly distasteful the way that was done. I don't know whether he was expecting that to happen, but to bring in a level of Schadenfreude that was for KSI and the crowd to wallow in the misfortune of Wayne Bridge, an emotional misfortune, I thought was very poor. It doesn't surprise me that he pulled out. I was surprised that he was going to be the opponent, if I'm honest with you. We know that he can handle himself. He's had a boxing match before. I'm not sure whether he boxed as an amateur, but he certainly had a boxing match where he looked pretty good.
I think that was Sport Relief in 2018.
Yeah, and he looked pretty decent, didn't he? He certainly looked like he had the shapes anyway. Was that 2014, over 10 years ago?
No, 2018.
2018. Oh, 2018.
7 years ago.
Right, yeah. It was just a weird little act. And I was very disappointed in KSI. He was an incredibly bright, incredibly erudite young person in that space, in that Misfits influencer space. And I've met KSI several times. I've written about him. He's in my book, as you know. But I was just very surprised that he used that Route One. As I say, distasteful. It just felt distasteful. I felt bad for Wayne Bridge watching it at the time. I watched a clip afterwards. I wasn't watching it live. I was working at TalkSport Live in the studio at the time and had the Darren Till Anthony Taylor fight on my phone. But when I watched it back, I don't know. Am I wrong thinking it was in bad taste? I didn't. There's a way of promoting fights and promoting events, but I don't think you tap into and focus in on on that kind of misfortune that someone's gone through in life, in order to sell a fight. And it didn't surprise me. Well, I feel sorry for him that he went through that and then decided, or they had to go through that, and then decided to pull out the fight. I wish he'd got the rewards from being paid for putting himself through that. Frankly,
Who would you like to see KSI fight instead? On
Conor
what?
McGregor. Conor McGregor. I think they're similar kind of size. I wouldn't mind seeing Darren Till fight Conor McGregor in a boxing match as well, but someone like that um, for KSI. Obviously, Darren Till's being mentioned, and that may happen, but he's an awful lot bigger, I think, than KSI. I think Darren's bigger than Tommy Fury as well.
Darren Till's scarily big. That's one thing I was saying to people, and how big that he looked on Saturday.
He did.
I know Anthony Taylor's a lot of a smaller character for that weight, but he already looked like there was a fairly big size advantage for Darren Till just at the weigh-in, but then seeing him on fight night as well, it was a unbelievable.
When I heard that Darren Till was fighting Anthony Taylor. I mean, I knew Anthony Taylor when I was working with Bellator, presenting with Bellator, um, and bumped into Anthony many times. And he's not a big guy, and I was really, and he's not a great boxer either. He hustles his way in a ring, um, and I did think Darren's uppercut would be the punch because I thought Taylor would try and hit and hold the whole time. In fact, he used the ring more, and Darren was very patient. Um, there looked like a huge difference, a huge weight and size discrepancy between the two. And when you think Darren had to boil down in weight to make 170 as a welterweight in the UFC, was almost a very, very big welterweight and a small middleweight in the UFC. So Darren could quite easily be a cruiserweight in boxing, easily be a cruiserweight. So 200 pounds. I can't remember what they weighed in. I don't know if I watched the weigh-in for.
And Darren Till came in at 195 pounds, I believe, and Anthony Taylor came in at about 192, from what I can remember.
Wow, I didn't even think Taylor was anywhere near that, to be honest. But because he's like 5'9". Darren's a really big human being, a big specimen. Listen, I thought he did very well, a sharp shooting with his left hand, but I don't see Darren Till and KSI being the next fight. It's not going to ignite. Well, I know it's been talked about now, but I don't think that's a massive fight. I think Darren Till. I want to see him in fights with decent boxers because I think he's got it. I know in misfit type boxers. I wouldn't mind. Darren Till's the right kind of size for a Jake Paul or maybe a KSI if that's going to happen. But KSI is not a big guy. Am I thinking you were there or not?
I was not there on
Oh, you
Saturday,
weren't there.
sadly.
You weren't
I
there.
watched it from home. Moving away from this, just my last one. My colleague spoke to Joe Gallagher today at the launch press conference for Natasha Jonas versus Lauren Price. And he mentioned some of Okolie's next fights and potential names. And one of the fights that he said was made was Lawrence Okolie versus Joe Joyce, but Joe Joyce has now allegedly pulled out of the fight. What do you make of that fight, first of all, in that type of matchup?
Is that March the 1st?
I'm not sure when this fight was set to be. No, so this was meant to be the fight after Joe's run out in Bournemouth that he's got booked.
Oh, okay,
They
okay.
have a big. I know that there's a big fight set up for Joe that they want to make, and from what it looks like, according to Joe Gallagher, it was meant to be Lawrence Okolie.
That's interesting.
But
Okay,
now,
obviously, Joe is training Lawrence Okolie.
so yeah, Joe Gallagher's training Okolie, isn't he? Yeah.
Yeah, so he had knowledge on that. Well,
Hmm.
that would have been a great fight, but a difficult fight for Joe Joyce. But look, he's been beaten by Zhile Zhang twice. He needs a very decent. Well, obviously, he's getting a knockover opponent. It looks like I use that
Hmm.
expression as the Bournemouth fight just for him to get back in winning ways. But I think that's a tremendous fight because outside, say, a Lawrence Okolie, who are there other than the big names? Other than big names for Joe Joyce, he's on that level.
Would you say
Uh,
Dillian White maybe versus Joe Joyce?
yes, fantastic as well. Um, Derek Chisora again, even I would see. Obviously, Derek Chisora's got Otto Wallin coming up very imminently now. He's got to come through that first. But yeah, Dillian White, great matchup for Joe Joyce. Unless Derek Chisora nabs Dillian White for a trilogy as his last fight. But Joe's in a difficult position because he really does need to make a name back for himself. Look where he was in having beaten Joseph Parker, knocked him out and stopped him, and having what he did in lockdown to Daniel Dubois. 2 fights with the big Chinese guy, Zhile Zhang, and he has literally had to fight his way back from the wilderness. And we love Joe, but he's got to get back, and he needs to get back in the win column hard and fast.
Just my last one. Who would you like to see Lawrence Okolie face next?
Well, now you've mentioned Joe Joyce. I like the idea of that Joe Joyce fight. I'd like to see Dillian White in with Lawrence Okolie because I think there's going to be real heat in the build up to that. We all remember their rows with Dean White, and I was there in the corridors when they were. I think I was interviewing Dillian or Dean when that kicked off. When Lawrence was there. No, I think I was interviewing Lawrence. So there's history there. Dillian's brilliant at selling a fight. Who else? Well, Dillian's 5 at the moment with the. Lawrence is 5 at the moment with the WBC. Who else is there out there for him? Oh, there's so many good fights. The trouble is, he's with Frank Warren. Fabio Wardley's with Frank Warren.